Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Kink Tank. And this episode, we're going to be talking about Thuddy versus Stingy. These are some of the play topics that we're starting to get into on this show. And we have our esteemed panel here that's going to help us walk through what we really mean by that. It's actually something that you hear a fair amount in the community when people are expressing their preferences or when they're talking about toys. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but let's start there anyways and then get into the conversation. Thuddy versus Stingy. Go.
Well, so generally speaking, Thuddy and Stingy are the words that we use to determine two different classes of toy, right? And generally speaking, there's just the two. All the toys that we mess around with, and we have like the two categories. So Thuddy, typically most people would describe them. That's one thing probably to mention. There is no consensus
No.
as to what is actually Thuddy and what is actually Stingy. There's kind of a lot of bizarre kind of difference of opinion. But generally speaking, a thud is something that hits you with a thicker, fuller, blunt impact. So I think a flogger is Thuddy. I think that a fist, generally speaking, is Thuddy. Even like a spanking hand, I think is Thuddy. I think paddles are Thuddy.
Okay,
Generally,
there
when
is a
people
difference.
generally when
of
people are
opinion.
talking about thud, they're talking about floggers. Like most of the time when someone asks you, that's like the first thing they mention.
Right.
No?
I
Yeah?
think that except for the hand thing, because that can be really smacky.
I think it depends on whose hand it probably is.
Exactly. It depends on who hands, because that little jerk over there, husband, his is very stingy. Super stingy, annoying. But if he just fist punches, then it's Thuddy. So it's how the implement is used.
Right.
Good point.
So, is it fair to say at its simplest form, a punch is a thud and a slap is a sting?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so on the other hand, like a stingy toy, generally speaking, is like something that whips you really, really like softly, but it has a high frequency of pain.
Yeah.
So like
Usually,
a
yeah.
whip, a
Usually,
slap.
the surface area of the implement is often for me what determines. So a paddle, for instance, yeah, there's a slap there, but you're hitting a piece of skin over a very wide area. Whereas
Yeah.
with a cane, you have a very focused force on a very thin piece that generally, generates a much stingier sensation. It sort of bites into you.
Sometimes it also can be the material it's made of. Because we have things that are cane-like that are actually Thuddy because of the material they're made of.
Like if they're heavy.
Yeah, like we have this giant screw bolt thing that's probably, 4 feet, 3 feet long, that feels more, it looks like a cane, it swings like a cane, but it's Thuddy.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah, and it's 8 pounds, so it's heavier.
Right, but one of the things that I kind of hate this. I understand there's like um, a tendency to put things in two camps. I like Thud or I like Sting. You know, it's kind of yeah, it seems kind of like So are you dominant or submissive? You know,
Yeah.
like there's no room in between. Obviously, this is subject to perception. It also probably depends on which part of the body you're hitting.
Exactly. Oh,
But
yeah.
yeah, but it's kind of like when you ask someone if they have a favorite child, and they're like, no, I don't have a favorite child, but they totally do. It's kind of like that. Like most people, if you ask them if they like Thuddy or Stingy, a lot of people are going to be like, no, no, I mean, I like all the things. But if you ask them what their favorite thing is, people usually have an opinion. I know personally I am a Stingy bottom. Like that is absolutely my preference pretty much most of the time. Just because I like the sensation profile that comes with stingy toys. But there's certainly a number of Thuddy things that I like. I just know I tend to fall into that profile more often.
I go both ways. It just depends. I like Thud to start out with, stingy and crazy towards the end, and then back to Thud so I have a kind of calm down.
Ugh.
But it doesn't always go that way.
I
Yeah.
agree with Jamie. It depends on my mood. I like both of them. So depending on what I'm feeling that night is what I'm going to want.
I've noticed as a top, anyways, that um, stingy implements require maybe a little bit different approach. And so if you're, putting somebody in a space, or you are, trying to, if you want the scene to continue, oftentimes, stingy with its intensity, whether it's the cracker of a whip, or it's the fine surface of a cane, or if it's a needle, pushing needles through people often produces a stinging sensation, or cutting or something like that. That sometimes, it requires a little bit different treatment, because Thuddy, for a lot of people, unless you're like really bruising the shit out of them, like really playing hard, you can play Thuddy for a good long time before it reaches a crescendo of, okay, I can't take anymore, I can't do this. Stingy tends to make people, it's very intense, it's very abrupt, and sometimes you have to give a little bit more breathing room and a little bit more processing in between each strike. And when it gets in, it can get intensity wise, it can build faster and become, a problem or a safe word. it could become a safe word. It seems to be much quicker than most study sensations. Do you guys agree, disagree?
Granted, but the stingy stuff can go on for a long time without causing any significant bruising or anything like that. So you can ramp it down, and you can go on for a long time. But yes, it can be very intense very quickly.
Yeah, and I like too I think maybe one of the reasons why I tend to like stingy toys is that they do require, in my opinion, a little more precision, maybe a little more like mindfulness to what you're doing, because you don't generally, I mean, besides aiming for a general part of the body with a flogger, you don't have to pay that close of attention. I mean, you have a very wide surface area that you're working with, and it's a downward motion. I think they're just easier to wield a lot of the time, say with a paddle, that kind of thing. A stingy toy just requires a certain, I don't know, level of attention, and I like that as a bottom, and I like it as a top as well. So when I want to top, I want to top stingy things, because I like that challenge, and I like that connection that it brings me with the person that I'm doing it with, because they know I'm paying really close attention. And I know that they'll react. I like that immediate reaction as well. That's
a really good point, about sort of specific areas, because you're sort of concentrating the force or concentrating the power into a small area. Yeah, that's kind of a thing. I would much rather take a flogger in the eye than a single tail whip.
Right.
What are you doing?
I'd rather take neither, actually, but if I had to choose, yeah. So when you're using stingy implements, those focused sort of, focused strikes, I think you do maybe have to be a little bit more precise about where you're.
Oh yeah.
About where you're hitting.
Yeah.
I have a question for you, Mr. Michael.
Yeah.
As a top, do you have a preference on actually welding a stingy versus Thuddy? Not for the end result of what it happens to your bottom, but as the top, do you just have preferences on toys? Because like me, I'm like, anything Thuddy or Stingy, bring it on. I don't care about the toy, but I don't know how that is from the other side as well much.
Yeah, and I don't really have a preference that way. We were talking about this a little bit sort of after the show last time we were on, and or like Josie said, there's likes to play with Stingy because of the immediate reactions and things that it's, you get some feedback, and you get a little bit more feedback. But honestly, I'm just as happy with let's say even less intense. Like one of the things that I like to play in is body drumming, and that's generally a Thuddy experience. Yeah, I mean, you can use slappy things that are a little bit stingier, but really the idea behind it for me is that you're doing something very predictable and very, let's say, unintense for a long period of time, which allows people to settle into a space, and because you're predictable, they can sort of shut down a little bit. They're not worried about the next thing that's happening and where it's going to strike, and constantly sort of on their toes. Now, some people really like that, and that's like what they're after, and maybe that's why they like Stingy. But for me, I'm just as happy with that sort of I don't know, the sort of the long, less intense thuddy type scene, because it can take somebody to a really nice place. It's almost, it's, am I a top at that point, or am I a masseur? I don't know. I guess some people, it looked an awful lot like a massage that I had a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, but if you're gonna poke somebody in the same place 1,000 times, it starts to hurt after a while. But by the time it starts hurting, they're kind of in a zone where that hurt feels good, and they're fully, enjoying it and processing it.
Yeah, something which is purely thuddy can feel very much like a massage and can be very comforting until it gets very intense indeed. Although one thing I posted on the little notes here is Stingy and Thuddy are two extremes, but you miss most of the one in the middle, which is the 600-pound elephant. It's either a burn or an ache. A big heavy cane isn't thuddy. It hurts like hell, but it's not particularly stingy. It's a burn or ache, and there's depending upon how heavy a paddle is, that can be either pure sting or a lot of burn and ache. I think that's a missing middle ingredient that people are that I think should be talked about.
For me personally, when it comes to the ache, I usually don't even comprehend any of that until the end. The burn I can see definitely, but the ache for me comes after, because that's when I kind of everything clicks back into place, going, "Wow, that kind of sucks, but it's good."
Oh, understood. Yes, the ache the ache can be a tender soreness the next day, which can be a lovely reminder. But yeah, but it takes a while.
All right. Now, do I sound okay on my mic? I was just wondering. A little sound check here.
You're just a little bit staticky.
Staticky. Damn it.
Like crackles.
Yeah, a little bit crackly. But I can understand you.
I can understand you. I just noticed it earlier.
Okay. Does that improve things?
Oh, you're normal.
Oh, I just went. Okay.
You sound like you're a little bit further away, but...
Okay. So I'm just, all right. Well, we'll go with that then. So I'm sounding a little bit clearer now?
Yeah.
Most definitely.
Okay. Excellent. What else? I mean, we talked about thingy, study, burn, and ache. I think that's an interesting way to, describe it. Is that, I mean, are we talking about two different spectrums, or are we talking about, sort of the same thing expressed differently?
I experienced that burn ache. When you say that, my most immediate, thought is that I don't classify toys into burny and achy things, or a combination of the two, but I would classify sensations into those things, and a lot of those things would revolve around spanking objects, because that absolutely starts as a sting, and then it stops stinging because you've been hit in the same place for a while, and then it kind of turns into a burn, and then eventually it turns into an ache, and that I can understand, and that's true, but I feel like that's pretty, for me, it's related to one specific kind of thing.
And the next day, it's just pure ache, right?
Yes.
Yeah, which is the point. You did it right.
Yes.
But the burn effect also has, for me, who's also another type of player that likes fire play, that's where my head goes. I'm like, I haven't set myself on fire today. So that's kind of probably a little confusion on my end as well, because I associate it so strongly with another thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely the ache.
I was talking more about the distinction between light paddle and a heavy paddle, which can both, you adjust the intensity until they both hurt the same, but the feelings are very different, none the same, and that's the sting, burn, or whatever you call it, spectrum. But it's obviously all in the same spectrum of how it feels when it hits.
Yeah, and the same thing that I hate about the Thuddy, Stingy, those are the only two choices. It doesn't leave a whole lot, in between. As a negotiation tool, I think that it's a good question to ask. A lot of people do have in their mind what kind of pain they enjoy. And when you present that to them, sort of, are you more of a Thuddy person or are you more of a Stingy person? That one answer will, separate it on a dichotomous workflow. It gets you down the right path to begin with,
Right.
and then it's just sort of fine tuning it from there. But if somebody has a strong preference for Thuddy or Stingy, it tells you a lot right up front that's very useful.
Everybody, they're common words, and everybody knows what they mean pretty much. I think it's missing a piece of description, but it's agreed on.
Right. They're almost onomatopoeias. They're almost self-explanatory.
Well, it's helpful when you're learning too, because if you haven't experienced a lot of different kinds of implements and you would like to, you can kind of get your mind around, what that could possibly mean if you're talking about the difference between a Thuddy and a Stingy toy profile. And then you can ask people to try different things, but I think it's definitely helpful when you're first getting started to just divide them into two and then cherry pick the things that you like later.
Well, the thing is, it's a starting point. Anybody in the community, new or old, at some point has been hit with a Stingy object or a Thuddy, and you immediately know which.
Yeah.
It's a basis. This is where we go. Did you hate that? No. Did you love that? Maybe. And you go with it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So maybe one of the other ways that you can distinguish a Thuddy from a Stingy toy is the sound that it makes when it hits you. Because a Thuddy toy hits you like a truck. Like it a lot of times a Thuddy toy makes like a thump sound against your body, and a Stingy toy whistles past your ear, or so that's I never thought of it that way. What a great idea, Jamie.
Could you go even further and think about the kind of marks, if you are into that they leave? Thuddy for me usually leaves bigger marks. Stingy usually, like one particular one I have that someone made in this community is a car antenna, and it leaves a starburst. Like it looks like a little comet, and they're tiny. So it's tiny, Stingy, evil. Thuddy's big, evil.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point.
Except Stingy can also be just a wide red spot, which fades relatively quickly on many people.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
And it can be very intense in a hurry.
Super concentrated to a smaller area.
Well, it can be a big area. It can cover most of one cheek or both.
Spoken like a true Spanko. So let's talk about, we all have differences of opinion, slightly differences of opinion, because I was thinking of different kinds of play in my head, some of the things that I've seen, and I was just thinking about, like, Staples, for instance. It's kind of both, isn't it? There's like that ka-chunk.
Well, it makes it sound like a thud, but it feels like a sting.
It feels like a sting, okay. But what are some of the things that we're talking about here? We're saying floggers generally, you can get barbed wire floggers or rubber floggers or something, and you can make a much stingier feeling out of them. But in general, we consider floggers to be more of a Thuddy instrument. Yeah. Canes, single tail whips, dragons, tongues, sort of like leather thong type, a toss or any of those type of implements are generally considered stingy. I think of when I think of fists, that's definitely a thud for me.
Yeah, me too. Using
a fist for punching, and I don't know, what are some of the other sort of common implements that we have that you would sort of classify, just for the benefit of people watching this that may not have very much experience in BDSM play. I'm saying that it's a pretty good negotiation tool to sort of give people that sort of A/B choice to begin with. So for somebody who hasn't experienced some of these things, how would you classify some of them?
Belts and straps are certainly stingy.
Yeah, needles are stingy.
Okay.
I think an open hand is stingy to me, but like a paddle to me is Thuddy.
Depends upon the paddle. I've got some which will change your mind in a hurry.
I have some thin ones that are still paddles, but they hurt like they're stingy as all get out.
Well, yeah, and there are different sizes, and there are some that are made out of leather, and some that are made out of wood, and some that are, ping pong paddles.
So we have ping pong paddles. If they have a padding on them like they're supposed to, those are definitely Thuddy, but they can be stingy.
Yeah.
Because it just depends on how you weld it.
Yeah, Stingy takes a light weapon, arriving fast, and a really smooth, preferably shiny surface for maximum sting. Yes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we have this one that is Cat 5 cable that's just looped out, and somebody made this beautiful handle. I hate that thing, and it goes missing for months at end. I don't know where it goes, but it is super stingy, and it's not a lightweight. You can try to wield that nice and gentle, and it is still going to hurt and sting.
Yeah, that's not what I call. Yeah, I know Cat 5 cable. I've strung a lot of it in my time and used it a couple times. That's more like a heavy cane, and I wouldn't call that stingy. That's what I would call into the to the burn, or it hurts, but it's not the sharp sting.
I think it's a sharp sting. You're talking about when you loop it around, like just like the one narrow loop attached to it.
You got to like, I will show you.
Yeah. The bad thing, Jamie, is when that goes missing, quote, missing,
Goes missing.
there's a lot of it just laying around.
You have to
I'm
figure
sure
that
in your
out.
house, you guys probably have about 1,000 feet of Cat 5 around your house.
He probably has it. Well, I know he has it at work, but no. We have a lot of like everyday items that we use, but one that's the stingiest thing for me personally is it's a spatula that you use for mixing batter. What is that called? Ours looks like a squirrel, but that is very stingy. It's silicone.
Yeah. Although
Oh, okay, I get what you mean.
I find that the wooden spoons are stingier than the spatulas, which are a little bit heavy. But yeah, they're all up in the ouch stingy area.
Right. There are really only a few implements that I can think of. I mean, like paddles, they might be one or the other. Depends on the design of the paddle, how big it is, how much surface area there is, what it's made out of, all those things. Floggers, yeah, you can probably get some sting with, for instance, cat o' nine tails with something on the tips of them, or but there are very few implements that I can think of that are pretty much one or the other. I'm thinking of single tail whips. I use those. Really, the only time you're going to get a Thuddy experience out of a single tail whip is if you hit them with the butt end of it, the knot on the other side, which is okay. No, that's okay. That's perfectly viable use. But it doesn't matter how light you hit somebody, or it doesn't matter how much of the whip you lay across them when you strike. It's going to sting a little bit. It's more stingy than Thuddy. But are there other implements like that that are just by nature one way or the other? I think a baseball bat is probably a good example. There's no. Well, I don't know. Jeez.
I don't know. If you hit a certain part of the body, I've experienced a baseball bat being very sticky.
I think electricity is inherently stingy. I don't know that you can ever make that thud.
Yeah, I
I
agree.
agree.
Yeah.
I might even put it on a fourth thing because it's kind of different from all of them.
Yeah, it's kind of its own thing.
Yeah.
Kind of like fire.
So and fire is well, I guess if we use a Jim's scale of burn versus ache, it's burn.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's different type of fire if you actually really want to go that technical. Because you have your long, warm fire, like you do a fire cupping, which really does sting a little bit, but because of the cupping. But then it's warm. Or you have like flash cotton, which is straight up sting and gone.
Yeah.
But you're still talking about stingy, Thuddy, and fire. Like you can't talk about fire under either of those other two categories.
Yeah.
Right. When you're having that negotiation with somebody for the first time, you do have to put that in a different category, I think.
Yeah, you can't just sneak it in. Like when you said you like
Well,
stingy,
you said stingy, so I'm gonna light you, right?
Well, like fire's not usually a beginner thing. Usually, it's not the first thing you whip out of the flames.
That's true.
Yeah. Belts or paddles or hairbrushes, maybe.
So for the bottoms in the room, let's talk about mixing these sensations. Because, I mean, one of the things that I like to do as a top is send, let's say, confusing signals to the bottom. So for instance, a spanking while I'm tickling some other part of them. You know what I mean? they're getting two sort of conflicting inputs. Do Thuddy and Stingy, are they at odds with each other like that? Does it take a certain kind of, a certain state of mind to better get into one or the other? Do you like them mixed, or do you prefer them to be, a whole scene of one or the other?
I think. Go ahead.
Oh, I prefer everything mixed. However, I like it Thuddy till I get to my happy place. If husband wants to kind of just do a mind screw, that's when you mix it up. Because I can't hit subspace when you do both. You have to kind of work me into it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's unpredictable like that? Like,
yeah.
You're not sure what's coming next?
It'll throw me out, and I'll start thinking about it again. I can't just reach that happy place.
Mm-hmm.
Conflicting feelings can be very nice. I'm thinking of a case where if you're being spanked or strapped or whatever, and your top is, get these soft, warm, comforting hands at the same time she's hitting your bottom with very conflicting messages.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sexually stimulating somebody while you're hurting them is an example, conflicting messages like that, and maybe
right.
the type of hurt. So if you, or just other sensations in BDSM play aside from thingy study, there's also, fire. There's startling people with sound, etc. But Jamie, you like it mixed, just sort of in a particular way?
I like it mixed. I mean, it's what I'm craving for at the time. Like, sometimes I just want craziness, but sometimes if I just want to get to my happy, like, in my head space, I do need it to be worked up too. So it just depends on what kind of scene husband wants versus what I can talk him into.
I just love that you call him husband. It sounds so Victorian. Husband.
It works. I've called him that for a long time, even before we were really even in the community.
I thought you were going to say before you were married. That'd be cool.
Well, it's even funny. What I do for a living, people will start calling him husband, and it's quite hilarious. But it's, yeah. Hi.
Okay. Anyone else have some Stingy, Thuddy insight, advice, questions?
I think it's a good idea to mix them together. I think a lot of people like the two sensations together, and especially if you're going for a certain headspace, it does kind of mess with you. But I think too, it really it accents the best things about both sensations. So if the thing that you like about Stingy is that it sends you to this really intense place, and then you go and do a Thuddy thing, and even a Thuddy thing that's very gentle, like a really light knocking or a rhythmic kind of a beating, you're kind of ignited from having done some like Stingy play, and then there's this really kind of calming, nice quality to this Thuddy, and then you have a moment to appreciate that, but you really appreciate it because it's contrasted with this other feeling. And then when you move back to the other thing, it's tuned up a bunch of notches because you just took a rest from it and played with this other way. So I think they really complement each other in a really nice way.
Depends upon the person a lot. Excuse me, it depends upon the person almost entirely.
Yeah, if they suck at it, then it would be bad to alternate between the two.
No, I meant
the person on the top, but also the person on the bottom's preferences.
Right, but you agree that this is sort of a talent that tops have for a particular bottom, is kind of knowing what goes when or where, how to play you, basically.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's such a cute way to say it.
Yes.
How to play me like an instrument. All right, well, we're gonna shut this one down and move on to another topic. That's good. Thuddy and Stingy. As much as that bothers me that people use those terms all the time, I get it. It is useful. But now we're gonna go on now for something completely different. We're going to talk about loss of trust. We're talking about, now, we could talk about this in a number of contexts. So what I want to do, and maybe we can address it, maybe it'll all come into one show, but I wanted to talk about loss of trust in a relationship context rather than in a scene context. So in the middle of a scene, when somebody has, played past your boundaries or your negotiated limits or something like that, that is you experience a loss of trust, and something needs to happen, things need to stop, renegotiated, etc. I don't want to really talk about how to rebuild that relationship. I want to talk about relationship topics, loss of trust, whether it's from dishonesty or whether it's from, not holding up your end of an agreement, for instance. Um, all the different ways that people can lose trust for their partners, and what that specifically means in BDSM when we're talking about power exchange relationships. So what are some of the things? I was talking about dishonesty, for instance. I think that's probably the easiest to identify way to lose someone's trust. What are some other ways that you might cause a problem for yourself that way?
Well, and dishonesty and infidelity, I think, are two different. You can be dishonest and not cheat. So I think infidelity goes as its own kind of thing beside being dishonest.
Mm-hmm. Infidelity.
Yeah. I think also maybe not being respectful of vulnerable places. I think a lot of people put themselves out there in vulnerable ways when they're in the relationship with someone else. And if you disregard that enough times, or you kind of don't notice it enough times, I think someone can definitely get to the point where they don't trust you anymore with their vulnerable places.
So you mean sort of acts of aggression, whether they're, physical or emotional?
Maybe, or it could just be, them being vulnerable and like telling you something personal, or trying something new, and then having that person not acknowledge that that was difficult, or just not being sensitive to that kind of moment in a relationship.
Okay. Anybody else think of other ways to do this? To lose trust with people. I mean, I had mentioned, sort of not keeping your end up, of your agreement, and whether that agreement has been specifically negotiated, or whether that's sort of an implied or otherwise set by precedent. So, that I am agreeing basically to be here for you when you are sad, having a hard time, and then suddenly I am not there. You've sort of lost that trust. You've lost that. You've violated the agreement, basically, that you're going to be there for somebody.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how do you let's take dishonesty, for instance. Can you come back from that? Some people have this idea of once a liar, always a liar.
I think that is exceedingly complicated, especially when you love the person. It's very, very easy when you're like in a relationship with someone and you're talking to your friend and they say that he cheated, and you go, leave him. He's a cheater now. It's never going to get, better. He fucked up and now it has to be over. It is very easy to say that when you're not in the relationship. But if you're in the situation yourself, I do not think it's black and white like that.
It's a very much perspective thing, because we all want to say, hey, you should do this. And like you said, for me, I don't know what I would do. I don't know. I'm a type of person who's like, you screw me over, I'm done. But it depends on if they want to work on the relationship and if they want to make changes, because obviously something was done or wasn't being done to have one person cheat.
Yeah, and it does depend on the situation. I mean, I'm of the opinion that lies are not just lies; they're not equal to each other. So if you are dishonest about, whether it's or even a kind lie, which some people don't agree with me. This idea of a kind lie, and that could no, your ass looks great in those jeans, whatever it is. That these are not all created equal, and some people, I think, try to paint in broad strokes and say it's all the same. And I say, lying to somebody about whether or not you took the garbage out last night is a lot different than lying to somebody about, whether you still love them or not.
Yeah. And I
Yeah, I
think a lot
agree.
of people disagree on what a lie is and what isn't. So within a relationship, what you think the person did was a lie, they might have said, no, I just didn't tell you. Well, so then what do you do with that? Because you think they're a liar and they think that you are incorrect. So you come to this funny place of, so do we now renegotiate what a lie is? Do I correct myself because clearly my expectation was wrong? Where do you go from there? It's really complicated. I absolutely used to be one of those people who was like, it's black and white. If you lose my trust for these 5 reasons, then you're out. Like one strike and you're out. And some of those have happened in my lifetime, and I didn't kick that person out. And I'm really, really glad that I didn't, because I think that they were, complicated issues for me. So if I had to answer that, I tend to find that after an incident where trust was lost, for whatever reason, obviously there's a big spectrum of bad things that people can do to lose your trust. There tends to be a period for me where I kind of check in with my person, and we try to figure out like where we want to go. We try to talk about what happened. We try to talk about our feelings on both sides of the court, and we kind of feel it out. But there does come to a point where I would say you have to make a choice. You're either going to forgive them and move past it, or you're not. But staying in that kind of limbo place, I find, is the worst possible thing to do. Because no good things grow from that. You can't move on. You can't get any closure. You can't get close again. Like, you just have to make a choice. And if that's, you know what, let's just wipe it clean and let's be together and, let's just start anew from here, that's great. If it's, I just can't do it, like, let's call it quits, that's great. But I think you do eventually have to make that decision to be okay or not be okay.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of the problem that I see with people sort of recovering from a crisis like this. The initial action that causes the loss of trust, whether it's infidelity or whether it's something else, that's bad enough. And there seems to be, some conversation, a lot of sort of working it out, whether it's counseling or whatever it is, renegotiation, a conversation about how to work this out and how to make sure this doesn't happen again and how to sort of get back on the road to building that back. Josie, I think you're right that at some point you kind of have to make that decision, because I've seen too often that loss of trust, when the person never allows the person to earn some of that back. And if you're committed to working on this, then there does come that time. If you have decided that they'll never have your trust back, you should probably just save yourself the trouble and end it right there. How long, and sometimes that, well, let's talk about dishonest. Let's talk about infidelity. So someone cheats on you, and you're looking at the circumstances. Obviously, these are not all black and white situations, but somebody, they went against your agreement and did something that was, against your expectations and your requirements for the relationship. So what do you do? Obviously you talk. We communicate. But after you're done throwing shit around and, screaming your head off or arguing or crying or whatever it is that you do, how do you turn, if you've made the choice that you're going to work it out with this person, how do you get that back? Often what I see is a new set of agreements. A new set of agreements that is basically, well, you cheated on me, so I want all your email passwords, and I want access to your phone, and I want, to know where you are at all times. And there's almost like a penance or a period after that you sort of have to play by a different set of rules. And if the person is, wants to continue with this relationship, there's a series of hoops they have to jump through to show. I mean, how effective is that really?
Not
I think
very.
that's important. I think that's important. I think so. If I cheated and as penance for that, you wanted all my passwords to my shit, I would say no, because I think at that point, if you jump to that extreme, then we're not going to make it. You're not the kind of person that I want to be with. Like, I do feel shitty about having cheated, but I can't go to that extreme. But I think there's certainly like an expectation of a period of you being like making me breakfast and showed me that you love me, and just kind of
Rubbing
being
your
the
feet.
best, well, being the best version of yourself after a fuck up like that. I mean, if you're telling me that you're sorry, and I'm saying that I was hurt, but I forgive you, I think that rebuilding period is really, really important. Nothing unrealistic. Don't give me your email passwords. Don't like drive me to work every day. Like it's not. We should just be normal. Everybody acts normal in that situation, just a little bit nicer than normal. You have to rebuild. That's a major damage, and that's the other reason why I think making these decisions when you're in that like traumatized space is a bad idea. Because if you're still like actively reliving the trauma of you having just told me that you cheated on me, how am I supposed to talk to you from a place of forgiveness or rationality or any of those things? I just want to kick you in the balls. I'm not gonna do anything productive in that space. Now maybe a few weeks down the line when I have my rational brain back, we can have a real conversation. But I always tell people like do not make decisions from that traumatized crisis place because you can't. And once you move on from there, you have to rebuild a little bit to get back to where you were.
Right, and I think, and maybe Jeannie, I don't know what you were going to say, but this sort of that idea of okay, you fucked up, so we have a new agreement here, a new set of rules. This is what I need to feel secure. Is basically a show of distrust for a show of distrust for the other person. And that is, I want to know exactly where you are. I want to, I'm now going to. You're not going to hang out with your friends on, Sunday to watch the football game. Basically, this is your punishment. You're going to show them how much you distrust them. And I get that. It feels good. It's a little bit punitive. You can kind of get from the other person that their willingness to work with you on this and to do better. If they jump through these hoops, that kind of says something. But aren't you really just making it worse at that point? How much value is there in it, and how much of that is really? I guess it depends on the egregious nature of the offense to begin with. If you're talking about cheating on somebody, if you're talking about like thinking about cheating with someone, those are two different things. But you know what I'm saying? Like that. Does that work as a strategy, or does that just make it worse?
I think a lot of that depends on like whether what place are you doing it from? Are you doing it to be an asshole? Because basically, you were an asshole and you cheated on me, so I'm going to be an asshole and do evil shit to you. Like, I'm going to purposely leave my bag in the car every day that it snows and then ask you to go outside and get it just to be a dick about it. Or I am going to purposely, like, forget to bring you stuff from the grocery that you wanted. That's, at a certain point, it's just super petty. It doesn't serve any purpose. But if the place that I'm doing it from is that you hurt me a lot, and I need you to love me a little louder, and if that place looks like me asking you to like go a little further than you would normally go to make me feel good, I think if I were the person that cheated, I would feel that the place that that's coming from is less about punishing me and more about them. Like they need reassurance. It's not about me. It's all about them in that moment. I hurt them, and they need this from me. And as a partner, just like before in the relationship, before I broke the trust, if they told me I'm having a bad week, I need you to support me, I would have done it. So if they're telling me now, you broke my heart, I need you to help me fix it, I feel like it's kind of my responsibility to do that within reason. But I feel like that's acceptable. Like if I cheated, I would feel okay with that.
Yeah. I had this. A couple of years ago, I got a phone call from someone in the community that was having trouble with this, and I think they were just having a hard time and didn't have like a friend to vent to or something. And even though we weren't very close, they were just like, maybe I know you've had some experience with this, or you know a lot of people or whatever. I'm no therapist by any means, but she was basically saying he cheated on me. Okay. Sorry to hear that. What should I do about that? And then basically what they were talking about was taking measures now, bringing in the leash, and it's a reflex to regain control of something that you've lost control of. something that you thought you controlled. So if you pull in the leash and if you put up these new rules or boundaries or something like that, that you are going to be able to now control the situation a little bit better. If if I'm going through their emails, then I know that they're not, carrying on, making plans to leave me with some other person, etc. And, if they're saying to you, he cheated on me before, and what she was saying to me is, I think he might be cheating on me again. How do I know? And I think her solution was, I'm going to drive by his work. I'm going to see if he is where he said he's going to be. I'm going to, break into his email. I'm going to, look at his phone while he's sleeping. I'm going to, whatever it was. I said, well, why don't you just ask him? She said, well, because I don't think that I can, get the truth. I don't think that he'll tell me if he is. And then it just occurred to me, like, boy, that's a much bigger problem now, isn't it? Like, is this somebody that you really want to be? If you come to somebody and say, are you doing that again? And you know that whether they say yes, if they say yes, you're going to be heartbroken, and if they say no, you're not going to believe them. I don't know that you're really all that, good.
The trust is already gone. So at that point, mentally, she thinks or whoever the other person is, there is no relationship, I guess, in their head. Because she already thinks that they're doing other things.
It seemed to me like she had already made her decision. But then again, as Josie says, it's easy when you're not the person in love with this other person. So I'm sitting there going, you got your answer right there. You don't. It's not that you can't trust him. It's that you don't, and you won't. And so if you want to, be the crazy one that stalks him, stops by his work, whatever, checks up on him, makes sure that he's keeping up his, that's a lot of energy, and that is, to me, seems like not a relationship that I would want to find myself in. But I didn't love the guy either.
Yeah, but I think we're also talking about the difference between a loss of trust and a clearly broken, shattered trust. Because if you lose it, you might be able to find it. If it's broken to that level that you think that you need to stalk him, I think you might need to check yourself. But also, like, when I'm saying that, this is exactly what I'm talking about when I say that sometimes right after an immediate event where a loss of trust has happened, I tend to go the other direction. Instead of stalking you at your work, I tend to kind of take a little space for myself, because I know that in that moment I can't make a rational decision. If I'm that upset about something that you did, I can't make decisions from that chaos place. And to go to this place of, like, hyper control, it just breaks things further. I think it makes you look bad. My integrity and my reputation definitely matter to me. And if you're just behaving crazy, like if you're never the kind of person before who would have stalked your boyfriend and you're doing it now, you need someone to be there to tell you, like, hey, I love you, but you're acting kind of crazy right now. Like, maybe take a step back. And then you wait a little bit, and then you decide. If after that period of time you're still thinking, I need to stalk him on his phone, I don't think that he's being honest with me, then it's broken. You got to get out, because you're just going to resent each other for a really long time. If that were my best friend, that's always my advice that I think of.
Take some space.
Yeah, don't act crazy. Stop them from stalking somebody. That's not good.
Right. And I'm kind of conflicted about this next idea I'm going to sort of put forth, and that is, I don't like to think of people who engage in power exchange and kink relationships as somehow. I think some people have the idea that, like, we're playing varsity relationships where everybody else is sort of, playing checkers. Do you think that there's something to the idea that kink and power exchange relationships require any more or less amount of trust than your average vanilla relationship? Crickets. All right.
Well, you have to think about it for a second.
Sure.
I think that trust looks different. I think it's very layered. So, like, in a kinky relationship, I'm not just trusting you as my partner. I'm trusting you or I'm not just trusting you as my boyfriend. I'm talking to you as my partner in a community. I'm talking to you from, my power exchange other half and whatever role that entails, because you're not just my boyfriend. If you're my boyfriend and my daddy and my top and my master and all of these things, I think people relate to people in those roles on different levels. So if you've broken trust or if you have experienced a problem that affects all of these layers, then it's really hard because you have to negotiate through all of these things again from all these different viewpoints. So in that way, I would say it requires a different kind of trust. I don't think it's better or worse than a vanilla relationship, but I do think that it goes deeper. I think a lot of people, not everybody, they spend more time talking about, they partner with people on a really intimate level. So it's one thing for me to partner with you as my husband. It might feel different to me to partner with you as my play partner, to let you hurt me. That kind of makes me feel vulnerable in a really intentional way. So that kind of trust to me feels more intense, like I'm more aware of it than just my relationship to my husband.
Right. So there are basically extra layers on top of that sometimes people have to deal with in kink and power exchange. Not just, maintaining the lover's contract, but also the dominance contract and the daddy's contract and the protector's contract.
Yeah, and the complications that those, relationships bring about. It just amplifies the feeling of trust, I think. So whether it's more trust or less trust, I don't know if I'm really saying it's more trust. I think it just feels different.
Yeah, and I do agree, when people say this, when you're talking about vanilla sex versus BDSM play, I would say, yes, it does require a little bit more trust for you to do some of these things that we do with each other than your average, vanilla date that you're going to mess around a little bit. It takes more communication and negotiation, and it takes more trust because you are making yourself even more vulnerable than you are. You're almost making yourself as vulnerable as somebody in a vanilla engagement, but then with all that other stuff piled on top. And I just didn't know if you guys viewed the relationships in that way as well, as far as trust and loss of trust. There are extra responsibilities. There are different ways that we trust each other that vanilla people don't necessarily have to think about.
Yeah.
So that trust to, let's say, if I have agreed to care for somebody's emotional well-being, I'm going to protect them from the baddies in their life. If that is the contract, if that's the agreement, or I'm going to control their sexual activities, for instance, I'm taking a responsibility. And if I falter in that responsibility, I lose a type of trust that isn't necessarily, that's usually not part of the game in a vanilla relationship. So,
Yeah.
what about
When
loss? Go ahead.
Well, I was just saying, when you think of the stuff that's at stake for that loss, that's what makes me think. That's what almost makes me lean toward this idea that it might require more trust, only because if you did a bad thing, and I was in a position where I was going to lose you, I don't just lose you as my partner. I lose you as all of these things. I lose the service that I give you, and I lose you as my, sexual partner and my relationship partner and my confidant and all of these things. And I know that vanilla relationships have these layers too. But I think when I'm thinking in terms of loss, I think the stakes to me usually feel higher in a kink relationship versus a vanilla relationship. And that's what changes my opinion.
I agree. There's been two that I opened up to, so they knew my deepest and darkest secrets. They knew everything about me, and deepest, darkest could have just been a bad experience in my life. But they knew everything because they were the ones who took care of me. So when I lose that or lose their trust, it's more than just losing a vanilla relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And let's talk a little bit about that, sort of failure to keep up your end. Because Um, I guess that's a little bit when we're talking about infidelity. That is at its core really, you know, a type, the same type of thing that I'm talking about here. You agreed that you were going to, have this relationship with this person, but not with these people, or maybe not with anybody else, or you're going to, if you're agreeing that you're going to have other relationships, but you're only going to play with me or accept service from me. Cheating is basically going out and accepting service and cultivating a power exchange relationship with somebody when you said that you wouldn't. But in other ways, in these sort of agreements that we have, and maybe it's as formal as a master and slave contract, or maybe it's as informal as a precedent that has been set, that this is a service that you do for me, and then you decide that that service isn't important to you anymore. So you're just not doing it, rather than having a talk with me about it. Losing trust as far as how well this person's going to even communicate with me. When I lose trust that we indeed have a partnership, for instance, that they're not that they are thinking of me and the obligations to me and the relationship that they have with me, or if they're just going to kind of do their own thing, whatever suits them, there can be a loss of trust there as well. And that can come from both ends, because there are responsibilities on both sides of any power exchange agreement. So can you think of a good example where that's sort of, I'm having trouble thinking of a good, instance in where that sort of came to the forefront or became a problem for me, or became a problem for other people.
I've lost trust in someone from lying about experience, saying that they knew they wanted to learn more, and had no interest, and got hurt because of it.
Mm-hmm.
And once that trust was gone, I was done.
Mm-hmm. So what do we do? I mean, you decided, or you made that choice at that time, that you were going to cut bait and go. But people that are trying to recover from this loss of trust, and we talked a little bit about sort of punitive, or penance, or let's just say, an elevated attention, care for somebody, whether it's a show that a good faith show that you're interested in repairing this, or whether it's just to help them through a very hard time that they're having with it. But how long is too long? Josie, when do you know when it's time to put it behind you? Obviously, each situation's different, because there are different levels of violation of trust. Because this is something that I had a little bit of experience with when I cheated on a girlfriend a long time ago, and I decided that I wanted to repair that and get back in and do better, and not be more honest and faithful when I was doing monogamous relationships. That she kind of led me to believe that that was something that I could repair over time. So I changed my behavior, and I did. I jumped through some hoops, and a little extra attention and extra care. And 2.5 years later, I was still having this thrown in my face.
Ooh.
And that was when I decided this is never going to, I'm never going to regain it. And it's not for lack of trying on my part. I can really say at this point, she's holding on to it as a control piece. I need to get out of this.
Yeah.
And that is something that people will often do with that loss of trust, is they'll hold it as a control piece.
Yeah,
something
which I think
hold
is
over
usually
your
the
head.
bad thing to do. I think usually, no matter how bad the offense was, it's just not the right thing to do. No good comes from it. When you really think about it, does it really make you feel better, or does it kind of make you still feel shitty because you're still being shitty to that person? They were an asshole. I agree. If they cheated on you, they were bad. Shame on them. But for you then to basically do the same bad, it's like an eye for an eye,
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't fix it, and you still hate them. So,
Yeah.
so if you're asking me, the timeline, I don't really have a timeline, but I have, you know, I have always used a certain rule of thumb that the good cannot, the bad cannot outweigh the good. So if I sit down and whether that means I make a physical list, which I have done, or that just means that I sit and I think about it. And if the overwhelming feeling that I have is that this is just bad, I can't, I don't have the fuzzy feels, I lose my butterflies, I'm just like, I'm in this place where the bad is just thoroughly overwhelming the good stuff that we have. I don't think you can draw it out. I don't know that you can fix that, depending on, the factors that are there, but I think your gut usually tells you a lot about the way that you feel about someone. And
Sure. And I've noticed that, making lists like that can be useful because how you feel about it kind of comes out in the list. And then you go read it back and go, I pretty much made up my mind about this already, haven't I? I'm not
well,
doing a fair list because I've
yeah, because part of your list could say like, well, he's a cunt face, and I fucking hate him because remember when he left the garage door open that one day, and he cheated with that girl. But you know what? I hate his shoes, and I hate like if your list is like really lopsided like that, then clearly there are some serious feels there that are just not getting resolved, and probably won't be resolved depending on how angry you are.
Yeah, and I found that I sort of subconsciously rig the list. If I really want to stay with somebody or be with somebody after a loss of trust, I will find things to put in the plus column that because I've already kind of made up my mind how I want the outcome to happen. So it's useful for me in that way.
Oh yeah.
But Josie, you're basically saying that after your cool off period, when you're done thinking crazy about it, which could be 2 days, it could be 2 months, that
Yeah.
you will sort of revisit that and make some maybe calmer or better decisions about this kind of thing, and you decide whether you're going to keep resenting the person over whatever this was, or whether you're going to let that go and give some trust back to them.
Yeah, because I can't sit in that place. I don't have time in my life to waste all that energy hating someone I'm in a relationship with. At a certain point, you just got to cut it. But I have noticed, I will say that, when I've been in a situation where, they didn't cheat, but there was a loss. I think that's one of the things that you were just talking about that I'm really glad that you brought up about, sometimes it's not that they had sex with your sister. It's not like a soap opera. It's that in a kinky relationship, they stop receiving your service. They just told you one day, or they didn't tell you, which is usually like way worse. They just started doing the thing you always did. So if you always open the door for them and now they're purposely just doing it for themselves all the time, that kicks you in a really special place. That ignoring of a service or just that kind of decision to not accept it anymore in a kink, it's unique to a kinky relationship, and it is like a kick in the stomach, and it's just as bad sometimes as if you had cheated. Like it feels like that big of a wrenching to you. Um, I think that those things can still warrant this kind of a period where you have to basically like mourn them and make some decisions. So yeah, after I cool down and I make a list, I will say that, so when this has happened to me, I've made a list and I'll put all these things about these like shitty things about this relationship with this person and this thing that they did that just keeps coming back that really upset me. And there'll be like one thing in the good column and it's like, I love him. And I'll go with the good column. It's not the quality, like the quality of the items or the quantity of the items in the list. Sometimes when you sit down and make that list, what you get confronted by is like this feeling in you that like you don't really know how, but you're gonna give it a chance. You're gonna make the choice to like stick with the good column because it said that one thing and it kind of tugged at you and you just decide. Now, I know that that's really hard. I am maybe unusual in that way. I'm a mental health professional. I think that probably helps me with these kind of rational decision making things, but um, yeah, I think that kind of list making is important. Not because you want to see how many things you can get in both columns, but it's really a temperature taking of yourself and your real feelings toward this person when you sit down and like objectively consider your relationship with another person. And it's hard. I'm not saying it's an easy thing. It sucks. It's really hard.
Yeah.
I think really necessary.
And I guess I'm just of the school that, if I'm the violator of the agreement or the contract in some way, and I express that, I'm going to do better, I'm going to change what I'm doing, or I'm just going to not do what I was doing, and I'm going to do the work. I need to know that you're going to receive the work.
Yeah.
That there is a path to redemption, because if you're just going to do it to punish me and try and be a dick back to me, I understand that reaction and I understand that emotion, but save us both the time. It's not going to be fun for either of us.
Yeah.
And if you need to cut bait at that time, that's a kindness to yourself and to me, and then we can just move on and start doing other things. So I feel like with that loss of trust, I guess you have to decide whether you're going to allow them to earn it back and make that decision. How long it takes, I mean, that's subject to the person and the depth of the loss that you had. But don't play with that. That control thing. Well, he done fucked up, so he's going to cook my dinners and take out the garbage. He's basically going to do the housework for the next 6 months, and then he's going to, tell me he loves me and bring me flowers and all this other stuff. And then, after a 6-month period, you're still going to bring it up in arguments. You're still going to use it against them to be hurtful. Yeah, remember that time that you fucked me over? Well, I haven't forgotten it. Okay, there's a time where that has to end, or you guys are really going to go nowhere. I got out of that in my situation. I had fucked up. Definitely. I owed something back. Definitely. I was willing to pay it. And then I never did get the opportunity to get that trust.
Yeah. And I think, too, with...
You getting some echo?
Yeah, a little bit of echo.
Okay.
I think, too, some of that depends on the other person, the person who did the bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
That you have to, if you're going from that super angry place, you may not realize that you're being punitive. And
Yes.
maybe, so as hard as it is, because you know you fucked up, and you don't want to be the one to say you're being too harsh because you're really trying to be good, I think sometimes you do have to say, listen, you seem like you're still really angry with me.
Mm-hmm.
That's just how it's coming to me. Are you doing that on purpose? I think you have to tell the person.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, panel, for our loss of trust episode. We're going to cut it here, and we'll be back in, was it a couple weeks? Yeah. We'll say February 25th. We will be live again with a couple of new topics. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you for the panel for being with us, and we'll catch you in a couple weeks.